Hello, welcome all. It's great to see so many familiar names and new names in the chat. We're so pleased that you took the time out of your day today to join us. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Meg Gibbon, and I am Switchboard's Deputy Director, and I'm really pleased to be supporting today's webinar as your host. As you all know, we're really thrilled to be talking about digital skills in refugee integration, lessons learned from research and practice. This webinar will run for 60 minutes, and if needed, we will plan to stick around for a few extra minutes afterwards if there's additional Q&A. And the webinar is being recorded. The slides and recording will be posted on the Switchboard website and emailed to you within 24 hours. So look out for an email from Zoom with those links. We will also put together a transcript for the webinar that will go up in the next few days. We'll run through a few logistics here in Zoom very quickly before beginning. Everyone is currently muted. We're expecting a few attendees here today, so keeping the lines muted. And you can switch between your phone and computer audio under audio settings at any time. To ensure that everyone joining us today can see your chat messages, send them to all panelists and attendees or everyone, depending on what you're seeing there. I can see some of you are doing that already. And please put your questions under the Q&A tab. That makes it easier for us to track them. You can click on thumbs up to vote for another participant's question. And you should be able to add comments as well if you want to reply to anything others have shared. I'm so thrilled to introduce today's speakers. We will be hearing from Marwah Maasarani, Evaluation Officer at IRC, as well as Miriam Potocky, Senior Research Associate on the Switchboard team. And to kick us off, I'll hand it over to Miriam.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. The objectives for today are that by the end of today's webinar, you'll be able to explain how and why digital skills are essential to refugee integration, describe the state of the research and evidence related to refugee digital skills in resettlement contexts, and name 4 practical components of successful digital inclusion programs. We're going to begin by looking at a literature review that we just now completed at Switchboard, and we'll share the methods and findings of that study with you. So beginning with the background of the literature review. Let's begin with some definitions. So to begin with, I will be using the term digital skills or digital proficiency, and I'm using these interchangeably, and we're using the definition from the American Library Association, which is the ability to use information and communication technologies to find, evaluate, create, and communicate information requiring both cognitive and technical skills. Secondly, we're using the term integration. And here we're referring to the mutual adaptation between refugees and their host societies, specifically referring to creating communities where people, whatever their background, live, work, learn, and socialize together based on shared rights, responsibilities, and opportunities. Next slide, please. In this literature review, we structured it according to a refugee integration framework that was originally developed by Ager and Strang in 2008. This is currently the most widely used and cited integration framework globally, with close to 1,000 published citations, I believe. This framework identifies certain key domains that evidence has suggested or shown are central to integration. Now, very interesting for us today, this framework was updated in 2019 to include digital skills as a key domain of integration. And so we are using this framework, as I mentioned, as an organizing conceptual overview for this literature review. So let's look at the framework in a little more detail. So this refugee integration framework has 4 levels. So the levels are indicated by the rectangles here. And then it has numerous domains, which are indicated by the ovals that are adjacent to each rectangle. So let's quickly look at each of these. And as I mentioned, we will then be looking at digital skills as they relate to each of these domains. So at the bottom here of this framework, we have the foundation, and that consists of 1 domain, which is rights and responsibilities. And rights and responsibilities refers to the social contract that refugees and their host societies make with each other, which constitutes the mutual expectations and obligations of each party. So it's not a written contract, of course, it's a social contract consisting of mutual rights and responsibilities. At the next level, we have facilitators, and these consist of numerous domains, as you can see: language and communication, culture, then the new domain of digital skills, safety, and stability. And these all represent key factors that aid the process of integration. At the next level, we have social connections, and many of you will recognize that this particular level comes directly from social capital theory, and it consists of 3 domains: bonds, bridges, and links. Social bonds are relationships that you have with people that are close to you. So that would typically be family members, close friends, and people from one's own ethnic community. So in our case of refugees, people from the home country or country of origin. On the other hand, social bridges are relationships or connections that you have or that refugees have with the host culture. So those are those cross-cultural connections. And finally, social links are connections between the refugee and assistance agencies, such as yourselves. So that's that level. And the final level is markers and means, and this consists of the domains of work, housing, education, health and social care, and leisure. So with the exception of the latter, the first 4, I think we're all very accustomed to looking at as indicators of integration. And this one on leisure, I believe, was also recently added in this 2019 framework in recognition of its importance for refugees as well. So this is the overall guiding framework that we'll be using and looking at how digital skills are relevant to each of these domains. Before we go on to that, though, we're interested in whether this framework, or does this framework align with your own perspective on refugee integration? So let's take a quick poll.
Great, thanks all for responding in that poll. If you don't see a poll for whatever reason, feel free to answer via the chat. We'll leave that open for about 10 more seconds.
Okay, so for most of you, this framework does correspond somewhat, or it does, to your own experience. So that's good to see. So hopefully the findings that are coming will make sense in terms of where they fit into this framework. Thank you all. All right, first let's look at the state of digital skills in general. in the United States. So we do not have specific data on refugees because, as you know, when it comes to many things, we don't have specific data on refugees, but we do often have data on the foreign born versus the US born. So let's look at some of that. So this was a survey done by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in 2015. So looking at people here on the left, people who have at least some computer experience. So in the blue, we have native born English speaking population. So 95% of those adults have at least some computer experience. In contrast to those who are up here in the pink or magenta, those are the foreign born who speak another language at home other than English. So approximately 80% of those, 79%, have at least some computer experience. So we see a gap of about 15 percentage points on that indicator. Now on the right is the indicator of high digital proficiency. So high digital proficiency means the individual has the ability to conduct basic tasks on the computer, such as navigating websites, entering information into a website, identifying correct information from misinformation, knowing how to troubleshoot, and so forth. So on this, in terms of the native-born English-speaking population, a little more over a third, this is the ones in blue here, the 36%, have high digital proficiency compared to only 12% of the foreign-born who speak a language other than English. So that's quite a larger gap. So now let's recall that these data are for all foreign-born persons, not just refugees. So this will include high-skilled, high-educated immigrants, as well as refugees. Now, of course, many refugees are also high-skilled and highly educated, but a greater proportion are not. So these discrepancies are probably even greater when we're talking about refugees versus the US born population. Okay, on to the next slide. So with the current literature review, the purpose of this study was to do a state-of-the-art literature review to identify current emerging issues, highlight current research needs, and develop implications for resettlement programming. Go ahead. In terms of the methods here, next slide, please. We did a comprehensive search for studies on refugees' use of technology in the resettlement or integration stage. 39 of the studies met the inclusion criteria, and we specifically looked at the latest studies published since January of 2020 until April 2021 when we started this search. The studies spanned the major resettlement regions, namely North America, Western Europe, and Oceania. As I mentioned, we categorized the findings by the integration domain, and then we qualitatively synthesized the findings within each domain into the functions and benefits of the technology and the risks of digital technology. So let's look at the results. There were quite a few results. I'm only going to highlight a few, which are going to be bolded in the following slides, and I'll briefly mention the others. So in the domain of digital skills, a major finding is that refugees, like everyone else, uses mainstream apps such as Facebook, Google, Instagram, WhatsApp, and so forth, not the apps that are developed specifically for refugees. And there have been many of those, and they have been unused. So that's a waste of time. And of course, as you all know, refugee resettlement agencies and libraries are great learning resources for digital skills. In terms of the risks, the latest literature confirms that refugees indeed have limited skills and limited confidence in using technology, and that they face a steep learning curve. Another important finding here was that refugees often rely on family members, such as younger family members, children or teens or young adults, for assistance, and they also rely on resettlement staff. And unfortunately, one particular study done in Florida found that resettlement staff promote dependence in terms of digital skills, as do family members. So this is not unique to resettlement staff, but all of these studies have found that what happens is when we're trying to assist someone, we tend to do the task for them rather than teaching them how to do the task so that they can do so in the future. So this is certainly an area for improvement in terms of promoting independence when it comes to digital skills. Next slide, please. In terms of rights and responsibilities, again, I'll just focus on the bold here. In terms of a benefit, we have freedom of expression. Refugees definitely take the opportunity to express themselves digitally that they probably did not have in their country of origin or during their refugee journey. So that's a big benefit. In terms of risks, what jumps out is the exclusion of refugees, whether it be in the development of apps, the exclusion of persons with technical or cognitive limitations, and basically marginalization of refugees by creating these specific apps for them that they ultimately don't use anyway. Next slide, please. There are many benefits in the area of language and communication, a big one being the ability to maintain the native language by consuming native language content and communicating in the native language. And so this is particularly important to young people, children, or adolescents who might otherwise lose those native language skills. But the risk is the speed of digital communication is overwhelming to people with limited linguistic and digital skills. And as a result, they often don't trust the information that they receive online because it comes at them too quickly. And they often fear that they're going to miss important deadlines and so forth because they just cannot decode the information fast enough. In the area of culture, we found many benefits. Online communities, native language content, online religious content, digital storytelling and expressive arts, digital stories, storage of memories, transnational identity development. And again, the one I want to emphasize here is counter narratives. Digital media provide refugees the platform to put out their alternate narratives to the dominant negative stereotypes and messages that are out there about them in the mass media and social media. Now, interestingly, the literature did not identify any risks related to culture. So we were interested whether you all had observed any such risks. So we have a poll. What risks related to culture have you observed in clients' digital technology use? And please type your answers in the chat.
So as a reminder, send your message to all participants and all panelists and attendees, excuse me, to ensure that everyone can see the chat responses. I'm seeing one response come through related to harassment online.
Okay, so like harassment related to one's culture, yes. Bullying, yes. Spam, okay. Censor, yes, absolutely. Identity theft, yes. Fear of expression, scams, exactly. Risk of misinformation. Not clearly identifying national origin groups.
These are some great responses. Thank you
Yes.
all.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and some of these actually are coming. So yeah, thank you all. These are great, excellent points. Yeah, thank you. All right, let's go ahead to our next point. So next we looked at the domain of safety and stability, and here some of what you mentioned, some of you mentioned comes up, but on the positive side, Technology allows refugees access to resources and serves as a safety tool. And one thing I found particularly interesting here was that it serves as a safety tool in the sense of providing reassurance of the safety of loved ones abroad. So in a number of studies, refugees stated that they did not feel safe until they knew that their relatives back in the country of origin were safe. And that's essentially how they started each day. And then once they had that sense assurance, they could go on with the rest of their tasks. So I think that's important to bear in mind, because sometimes when we think of safety, we're only thinking about the family members here, but to them, it extends to their family members abroad. And technology serves as a source of stability in their precarious circumstances. Now, on the other side of risks, a lot of you mentioned these in the risks you just mentioned: cybersecurity concerns, misinformation and disinformation. So just to clarify between these, misinformation is unintentionally wrong information, whereas disinformation is wrong information disseminated intentionally to fool people, such as scams that you all were mentioning. And of course, personal safety concerns. And then one study looked at technology facilitated domestic violence. And they mentioned issues such as harassment, such as you all mentioned. Okay, next slide, please. The next important area is social bonds, bridges, and links. So overall, there were a lot of benefits in this area. I want to focus on the risks since we are short on time. So a couple of major risks that were noted were emotional labor of maintaining transnational bonds. So for many, they felt an obligation to maintain bonds with their family at home, and they felt an inability to help. So that was emotionally draining for many people. Also, some refugees maintained multiple identities online. For example, gay men maintained one identity in relation to their home country and a gay identity in relation to their host country. So that was draining for them as well. Now, this was not unique to gay men, but they're an example. And finally, not finally, but another very important point here is that several studies found that ultimately increased bonding, that is, the more digital relationships one has or the more closeness one has with one's family members or people from your country of origin, the less bridging there is, the less linking there is, and the less learning of the new language is. So this is a real dilemma that I think we all need to grapple with, because obviously we want people to maintain those bonds, but ideally we'd also like people to build bridges, links, and learn the new language. A couple other risks very quickly: digital communication may hinder or replace face-to-face interaction. And in some cases, it's been found, particularly in Europe, not so much for us in the US, but digitalized services create distance between refugees and service providers. And on to the next slide, please. So the final domain we looked at before we look at implications was the area of work, housing, education, health, and social care. So again, a lot of benefits found here. The one I want to highlight is that on the bottom, digital storytelling, digital bonds, and digital bridges all enhance well-being. So digital storytelling, I imagine many of you are familiar with, but it's a means of getting one's narrative out there in digital media, whether it be through written narrative or audio, video, photography, whatever the case may be. The ability to tell one's story has been found to enhance well-being and empowerment, particularly for young people, but I would imagine this holds for older people as well. Digital bonds, so the relationships one is able to maintain with one's culture of origin do indeed enhance well-being, and that's why we just said they are important and we do want to maintain those. But likewise, bridges, connections with the host culture enhance well-being. So all of these digital activities should be encouraged. Next, please. And we didn't find any risks in the literature. So again, we're curious, have you identified any risks related to work, housing, education, health, or social care? Anything other that you have not mentioned before in the previous question that we had? Any new risks that anyone might want to mention here? Privacy of telehealth, absolutely. Inadvertent self-identification as an undocumented worker, yes. Distrust of the government, absolutely. Yes, these are all good, or not good, but the important additional risks that you all have mentioned. Thank you. Employers, interesting with the storytelling, being asked to represent your group. And of course, your story is not the group story, it's your story. Yeah. The more these services move online, the more difficulties there are going to be, I suspect. So all good points. Thank you all very much. And please continue entering them. We'll go ahead and move on to our next slide. Yes, so the final area we looked at was leisure. And the thing I want to mention here, of course, refugees benefit from online entertainment, but quite a few refugees mentioned the potential for internet addiction, and quite a few mentioned that they themselves thought they were addicted. And then others mentioned shame. So that was an important area as well. So the shame was related to sharing one's leisure activities online on social media. So they felt ashamed either because their family and loved ones back in the country of origin were still living in a war. So they felt ashamed sharing their leisure activities with them. And in one case, African women in Spain in a study reported feeling ashamed because the members of the community back in the country of origin would shame them for their particular activities that they were undertaking in the new country that were considered, inappropriate in the culture of origin. So that's something we should be aware of. So let's move on to the conclusions. All right, moving on. So in terms of the emerging issues and research needs, we've seen in the recent literature increasing calls for refugee inclusion in the development of tech and for reducing marginalization of apps, both in the development and the use of technology. We're seeing increasing evidence showing that digital expressive arts promote both empowerment and well-being. We're seeing increasing evidence, on the other hand, showing the emotional and social costs of digital social bonding, and referring there usually to transnational social bonding. And fortunately, we're seeing the emergence of research on understudied groups, such as I mentioned, gay men. There have been more studies on women, and there was one study on older adults that actually found they obtained great benefit from transnational digital social bonding. So it's good to see the emergence of research on these understudied groups. Next slide, please. Other emerging issues, continuing on, there is significant potential for mental health service delivery, as I think we've all seen during the past year. At the same time, there's a need for development of evidence-based, culturally competent, and user-centered mobile mental health apps. And we see the emergence of studies on teaching and learning digital skills with refugees. There were 3 studies of such nature identified in this literature review. So this field is definitely emerging and much needed. Next, please. So in terms of implications for resettlement programs, there's a clear need to tailor, develop, scale, evaluate, and sustain both formal and informal, in-person and online digital skills training for refugees. The literature, unfortunately, is not there yet. It's a great need. There's a need to use strengths-based teaching practices. This was illustrated in one study. And there's a need for interagency, interdisciplinary collaborations with libraries and educational institutions, which in the literature showed to be great resources. So in that regard, we were interested in our next question, whether your organization or program collaborates with a library for any purpose. So let's take a quick poll.
Thanks again, all. We'll keep that poll open for the next few seconds. If you are answering yes, we would love to hear what purpose you have for this collaboration in the chat.
Someone notes these collaborations have been affected during the pandemic, indeed. Yes.
I'll close the poll here and share the results.
So a little over half, 40% approximately do, and about a third don't, and the rest are unsure. So it's about evenly split. So very interesting. So for those that don't currently have such a collaboration, I'd certainly encourage you to explore that, because libraries are a wonderful, wonderful resource for digital skills learning. So at this point, I'm going to finish. Thank you all so much for your attention and your great comments and your participation. And I'll turn this over to Marwah. Thank you all.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much, Miriam, for that comprehensive overview. So what I'm going to do today, I'll be sharing some practical learnings from a digital inclusion project that we did here at the IRC called the Digital Access Project, which I hope you'll find helpful as you think about your own digital inclusion programs. So the Digital Access Project was a collaboration between the IRC and Marino Philanthropies, which is a private family foundation. And this project, the first of its kind or size in the IRC's Resettlement, Asylum, and Integration Department, and operating in all 24 US offices, provided 1,308 laptops to newly arrived refugee families in the US. The program started in 2019, and then as COVID-19 hit, the laptops became even more essential to families as states shut down and all IRC programs and services went virtual. The goal of the program was to provide refugees laptops as an on-ramp to the digital world in order to enhance their cultural and economic integration in their newly adopted communities. Since the donor was interested in integration, we wanted to break down what that really meant in order to be able to measure and report our progress. So we set out to achieve 4 key outcomes. And that's what you see here. So the first is digital literacy skills. We wanted to see clients improve their level of digital literacy by having these laptops. Adoption and uptake. We want to see that clients providing them with that digital access would give them the opportunity to access learning opportunities and apply for jobs. And we also wanted to see clients improve their English language skills with these laptops. And then integration, isolation, and community. We wanted to see clients having consistent support systems and social bonds and bridges. So in order to achieve these outcomes, we knew that based on research and evidence that just handing out the laptops would not be enough. Training and access to Wi-Fi and instructional materials would be needed in order to fully leverage the benefits of the laptop. So aside from handing out the laptops through contactless distribution, the laptops also included cultural orientation materials that were accessible offline. Offices offered linguistically appropriate digital literacy training materials and one-on-one instruction to clients. And they also worked with internet providers to ensure that clients had access to Wi-Fi. So how did we measure results? While we wanted to collect digital literacy data from all IRC sites where this program was running, not all had the capacity to support the evaluation, especially during COVID. So we focused on the 2 offices who opted in. And those were the IRC in Salt Lake City and the IRC in Sacramento. We provided the offices with the digital literacy assessment that was adapted from CORE's Digital Awareness for Refugees questionnaire and the North Star Basic Computer Skills Assessment. So the offices administered the assessment over the phone to clients prior to delivering the laptops. So that's what we call here the baseline. So we had 129 baseline responses. We then had enumerators call clients who scored less than 90% on the assessment 6 months later to do the assessment again to see if there were any improvements or changes in digital literacy skills. So that's what we refer to here as N-line. So there were some limitations to that in that we only had digital literacy baseline and N-line comparison for a much smaller population. And these enumerators who were trained by the IRC staff at headquarters also administered an online survey also at the 6-month mark to clients in Salt Lake City and Sacramento, and also to clients in other IRC sites. Since these weren't frontline staff and because we had resources at the national level for this survey and the project in general, we were able to expand the online survey beyond those 2 offices, since they didn't have to be the ones to do the data collection for that. The online survey had questions related to laptop use, community integration. We asked clients questions around how are they using the laptops, how much time they're spending on the laptop, how connected they feel to their community. And then we also conducted interviews with implementing staff across 10 IRC sites. So what did we learn from all of this? When it came to digital literacy, we saw improvements in skills over time, over that 6-month period. However, when it comes to digital literacy skills in general, as you can see here in the graph, there is a gender gap. So what you see in the table are the results from the digital literacy assessment at baseline and endline, again, over a 6-month period. The digital literacy assessment consisted of a series of 25 statements related to general computer skills, internet navigation, information management, communication, internet safety, and problem solving, for which clients had to respond either yes or no as to whether they were able to perform related tasks. The assessment scores were then calculated by counting the total statements marked yes out of the total of 25. So it's important to note that this was in fact self-report, how clients view their own skills. So that might kind of explain some of that gender gap, since the assessment had to be done over the phone because this happened during COVID, and so it was all done remotely. But overall, 71% of clients assessed at baseline and endline showed an improved digital literacy score at endline. I'll also note that the average percentage point difference from baseline to endline increased when looking at the clients who reported having received support in using the laptops. And not surprisingly, more time spent on the computer led to better digital literacy results. So like clients who spent an average of 2 to 6 hours a day on the computer had better digital literacy results at endline than those who had spent an average of less than 2 hours a day on the computer. So as a result of the program, clients also gained digital access. So 83% of clients surveyed reported they didn't have access to a computer prior to receiving this one from the IRC. So this led to digital access not only for the clients, but their families as well. So 83% of clients reported that other adult members in their family as using the computer. Clients surveyed reported that this has enabled them to receive IRC services, improve their English, connect with family and friends, search and apply for jobs, complete day-to-day activities such as paying bills, checking emails, entertainment, translating. When it comes to youth education, 57% of clients reported that their school-age children use the laptops to complete school assignments, and 82% of clients with school-age children in online school reported being able to provide their children that support that they needed while they were in school. Employment, when it came to employment, access to laptop contributed to clients' self-sufficiency by enabling them to search and apply for jobs online. 64% of clients seeking employment surveyed at endline reported using the laptops in their job search or to apply for a job. 61% of clients who received a laptop and were enrolled in early employment services achieved employment by program exit. This is just 1% higher than clients enrolled in early employment services during this time frame who did not receive a laptop. And so because the sample size was too small, we couldn't determine whether that finding 1% increase was statistically significant. And then clients also use the laptops for English learning. So there was an English learning application that was downloaded onto the laptops prior to distribution, making it easy for clients to start or continue their English learning journey. And then IRC programs also went remote, and our partners also switched to remote programming during this time. So the laptop became essential for accessing English classes and tutoring. And so 55% of clients surveyed showed an improved English language skills compared to level of arrival. And 90% of clients reported using laptop to practice or improve their English. And then when it came to community, the laptops allowed clients to search for information needed to navigate and adjust to their new communities. So like I said, at that online survey, we were asking clients how connected they felt to their community and how they're adjusting. 54% said that they know how to search for information related to public services or events in their area. 72% surveyed said they know how to navigate their communities. And when we asked about how they're adjusting to community life in general, 95% of respondents said they felt like they are adjusting very well or moderately well to their life in their new community. And then clients were also able to use the laptops to build and maintain social bonds and bridges. So staff across the network observed that the laptops helped individuals stay connected and reduced feelings of isolation. The laptops allowed for clients to communicate and connect with families and with family and friends and community members. 97% of clients surveyed felt very or moderately connected to family and friends in their country of origin or their most recent country of residence. And 24% reported using that laptop to communicate with family. And then 80% indicated having someone they could talk to outside of their family or the IRC. So based on all of these findings, and after conducting interviews with staff across the network, we learned that resettled refugees need laptops and they need access to hardware. So as mentioned previously, client surveyed, they didn't have one prior to receiving this one from the IRC. So having one proved valuable to clients, not only to stay connected, especially during COVID when everything was shut down, but also to access crucial IRC services in the early months of their arrival. As one staff member in Boise put it, clients needed the laptops to be able to navigate their own lives. It's difficult to improve your situation and your education if you're pen and pencil in a digital world. And then they also need access to internet. So US teams worked really, really hard to connect families to internet, although it did take a lot of staff time working with internet providers and getting everything set up. But as a result of this work, only 5% of clients sampled lacked access to internet at the time that they were surveyed. When it did take time for internet providers to kind of come through and set up the internet for clients, staff set up hotspots for them in the interim to make sure that they were connected. Clients also need language literacy, especially English language in US contexts, which is crucial not just for overall integration, but also helps when using digital technologies, as shared by Miriam earlier. Digital instruction is also needed. 23% of clients sampled identified literacy or digital skills as a challenge for using laptops. Also, tech support is needed to help troubleshoot any issues with devices. And so while there's not enough of a sample size to achieve statistical significance, we saw better improvements in digital literacy scores for those who had reported receiving support and using laptops versus those who did not. The need for digital instruction was also supported by qualitative feedback from staff across the network, which also aligns with the research and evidence that Miriam shared. So these are, the essential components for a comprehensive digital inclusion program. So you can think of them as things to just keep in mind as you're designing a digital literacy program for your office. And now I'll hand it back to Meg to kind of manage the Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Marwah, and thank you, Miriam, for sharing your portion as well. So we're seeing some great questions come through. We also received several questions in our pre-registration survey. So Marwah, I see there are a few clarifying questions about the IRC project that you spoke about, the Digital Access Project. So maybe we'll start there. Can you speak in a little bit more detail about the decision to use laptops rather than other type of hardware, and who and how many people in the household received the laptop?
Sure. So, to the first question about why the laptops? It was, that's kind of the grant we got from the donor, is to distribute laptops. So the donor had their own company, which is called Endless OS, which is where they kind of develop an operating system that's supposed to be kind of, you know, an easy to use version for people with low digital skills. It's kind of like supposed to be like an on-ramp to the digital world. And so these laptops were equipped with Endless OS. And so that was kind of the mandate from the donors, to kind of hand out these laptops with this software to see if it's helpful for, you know, a population with low digital literacy skills, if it kind of helps kind of segue them into the digital world. So that was kind of where that came from. And then it was one per household. Offices had the option to provide also another one if they wanted to, but it was mainly maybe one or two, not more than 2 laptops per household. And the idea was that everyone would kind of share it, would have access to it, because we did have a limited number. So we just wanted to make sure we reached more households, and that everyone would have access to it. And then when trainings were conducted, offices would invite you know, the adult members of the household to attend the training. So it could be for everyone, so everyone would be able to use the laptop.
Great. Thank you for that. I see there's also a lot of interest in measuring digital literacy. So you alluded to the North Star assessment. You also mentioned CORE's digital awareness materials. Can you speak a little bit more about what the assessment was that was selected, and resources people may want to look at when they're thinking about their own digital literacy assessments?
Yeah, so actually, our plan was to use the North Star assessment for in baseline and online, because the North Star assessment actually tests, you know, the skills, like, you know, you have to drag and drop, you have to right click and left click and all of that, and then it gives you a score at the end. But because it had to be done in person, it had to be guided by a staff member. We had to pivot once COVID hit. And then we just, you know, I kind of just took those questions from there and just made them yes or no, sort of similar to the core questionnaire, which had some questions already, but I added on to that, and to make sure I covered like different aspects of digital literacy, just asking yes or no questions to clients, because we had to do it over the phone. So we have those, you know, series of statements where they kind of ask, do you know how to right click? Do you know how to save and store files on your computer, on a computer? Do you know how to adjust audio? And they would just say yes or no. But yeah, in an ideal world, if you kind of have access, if you're in person with people and they can do this, you know, assessment, and then you'll have that score where it's actually assessing their skills. I think that would be really helpful. Yeah. Did that answer the question, or did I miss something?
I think it does, and I can add as well. So we'll be sending around our follow-up email with additional resources, and we'll link to both of these materials that Marwah mentioned for people to explore a little bit further. So I see several questions coming through in the chat. Thank you to those who are responding to one another. Additional questions, if you can send them via the Q&A, it's a little easier to keep track of them. That would be great. So why don't I turn to a question that we received during pre-registration while I go ahead and read some of these others through as well. So a question for you, Miriam. There was a lot of interest among the registrants about what can be said for digital literacy skills building among clients who are not literate in their own language. Recognizing that there's many gaps in this area, are there any recommendations we can share on this?
Thank you, Meg. That's a very difficult question. Unfortunately, the literature as such does not have anything to say on that. I think perhaps this is a very emerging area, and I'm sure people are working on it. I would guess people are working on it, but it hasn't made its way yet to the literature where we might know about it. The only things that have been suggested are generic techniques for marginalized populations, such as strengths-based approaches, inclusive approaches, collaborative approaches, hands-on experience, that type of general adult learning principles. But as far as teaching people with no literacy to do digital skills, very tough. No clear answers on that other than these general approaches.
How about you, Marwah? Did this come up in the Digital Access Project as any kind of lessons learned?
Yeah, so, like I was mentioning, that consistent one-on-one support. So some examples that offices shared with us, what they would do with clients who had, no digital skills, let's say at all, they would hand out the laptop and then they would, call the clients right away and then walk them through how to turn it on, how to turn on the laptop to say, okay, open your laptop, here's the power button. Some offices had set up account information beforehand. So they had set up everything in the laptop for clients prior to giving it to them. And they would call them and just, walk them through just how to get connected to Zoom. And then once they did that, they would then set up, their Zoom calls with the clients to kind of walk them through either whatever service they needed at the time. Some did it as part of their English language programming. Some did it as part of their job readiness programming. Some people did it, to do additional digital literacy training with clients. We also had this idea of, maybe with handing out the laptop, like having symbols of like, this is how you, like, this is the power button. But we didn't try that, but it was one idea that was floated out of kind of having like a sheet with symbols of like the power button, like step one power button, and then with what it looked like on the laptop.
Yeah, certainly a big challenge, one that we've received several questions about over the past year plus as well at Switchboard. And I see there's some good suggestions in the chat, people interested in this. So I encourage anyone who has good techniques, good practices to share those. And you can also respond via Q&A if you've seen good assessments that you'd like to share or other suggestions. So another question for you, Marwah, about the content that was already installed on the laptops as shared part of this, shared as part of this project. What was already installed on the laptops, and what was the hope for clients to use that?
Yeah, so there was a lot of cultural orientation materials that were included from CORE, from Cultural Orientation Research Exchange. So some of those materials that were available on CORE's website was just uploaded onto the laptop that would be accessible offline. So things related to health in the US, community navigation in the US, how to learn English. So there was a lot of different sections. And then we found when we surveyed clients, a lot of people accessed those materials and were able to use it. There was like a Rescue Tools app that kind of included a lot of that, preliminary information. And so we didn't want lack of access to internet to be a barrier to accessing those. So those files were kind of uploaded ahead of time.
Great. So a question from Miriam. I see regarding the literature, did you see any differentiation between digital skills using phones and tablets as compared to laptops or computers?
Yes, they really serve different functions, and they're both critical. So many refugees, according to the literature, depend largely on a mobile phone or solely on a mobile phone. And so this doesn't clearly allow you the same amount of functionality, such as job searching or filling out applications or simply doing necessary tasks on apps on the desktop or laptop. So just having a mobile phone is a limitation. At the same time, having no mobile phone is also a problem, since it's pretty much an essential in today's society. So I think that the two devices serve some compatible functions, yet some obviously very different functions. So one is not sufficient, but people need to have proficiency in both.
Thank you, Miriam. A couple questions regarding today's recording. I can mention that, yes, there is a recording for today's training. You'll get the recording slides and materials via email in about 24 hours. And you can always visit the Switchboard website as well for those. So I see a good question here about school districts. Thank you for that. Does anyone have good examples of partnering with school districts related to virtual learning? So I'll ask anyone on the call to share any ideas on this in the chat, and ask Miriam or Marwah if we saw examples of this at IRC or in the literature.
So I could just jump in here. I don't know if this answers the question, but some people, because I also saw another question about whether or not we only like chose families with children to provide the laptops to. The answer is no. We gave to everyone, but we wanted to ask those who did have children if they were able to use it. So what we heard from offices is that some children did receive tablets or laptops or Chromebooks from their school, but they also needed, another one for the rest of the family. So these laptops were kind of like really helpful in that sense. And they did partner though with school districts. Some partnered with school districts when it came to setting up Wi-Fi in the household. So some school districts kind of worked with offices on that. Not all, but there were a couple who had kind of grants that helped them out with that.
I can add a little bit from the literature. There were several studies that took place within schools. So quite a few of these programs for children and young people, both language learning programs and also the digital expression activities. Many of those took place in a school setting. Also, schools had adult education classes that it actually involved the whole family. So that was found to be a big benefit. So those were some of the highlights from the literature. Oh, another one I want to mention, a study in Germany described a homework mentoring program for refugees during COVID. And so they found that this really established great relationships between the mentors and the student, as well as provided linkages to other community resources via the volunteer mentor. So that was very interesting as well.
Thank you for all of those examples. One thought I can add is that Switchboard has produced an information guide on digital citizenship with a focus on youth, referring largely to safety, roles and responsibilities online, which was an area where we've received requests for support. So we'll share a link to that too, because it includes a few recommendations for engaging with youth in the context of youth programming, not specifically schools, but there might be some interesting takeaways. I'll add a link to the chat. I can see a couple questions remaining related to assessment. It's certainly an important area, so I'll pause for a moment and drop a link in the chat to the core digital awareness lesson plan with a assessment included. So I see that we are approaching the end of our time, and I looking quickly here through the chat, I don't believe we have any pending questions. If we do, again, we'll hang around for a few minutes afterwards just to see if we missed anything. You can always reach out to us separately too. But I'd like to take a final moment or two to share a few resources. So here are some of the ones that we mentioned. We have an evidence summary, what works to improve digital inclusion among resettled refugees. This summary looks at the intervention level. So Miriam spoke a lot about the relationship between digital skills and integration broadly, less about specific interventions. And so you might be interested in this summary to get at that level of detail. And then there's that information guide on digital citizenship that I mentioned. We have a few additional resources here from the Switchboard, HIAS, and CORE. We know there's been a lot of really excellent work related to digital inclusion, especially recently. So a few things here, and we'd welcome any suggestions if others have good resources to share. These slides that will have these clickable links will be shared with you, so you can take a look through these. And then we'll also flag a few of the sources that Miriam mentioned. So you heard her talk about that integration framework at the beginning, some of her definitions used today, and just a few of the citations that are included in the literature review. We're currently seeking publication for that literature review. That can be a long process, but in past experience, we have been able to send around links to those published studies a few months after they initially submitted. So we're hoping that's the case, and we'll be able to share a link to the study that Miriam talked about in full for you all to review in the coming weeks or months. All right, I see we are at time, so I'll just briefly review our learning objectives. We hope that having concluded this short session today, you'll be able to explain how and why digital skills are essential to integration, that you can describe the state of the research related to digital skills and resettlement, and that you can name 4 practical components of successful digital inclusion programming. Our survey will ask you whether we feel we achieved these objectives. We'd love for you to reply to that and give us any feedback you have. That helps us improve our webinars going forward. So a huge plug for that survey. It's really appreciated and quite brief. I will close there with our contact information. You can find us at email, on social media, and our website. And I'll also mention a huge, huge thank you to everyone for participating and sharing your questions, your comments so actively throughout today. So appreciated. And then, of course, a thank you to Miriam and Marwah for your facilitation. Really appreciate everyone making the time today. Thank you all.